and I'm going to show you two traditional types of fencing. The first one will be a hurdle fence, the same type used in wattle and daub. I have one half made and I will show you how to bring that up to height in a moment. And then I'm going to show you live willow fencing in a lattice work pattern. So we'll start with the wattle and daub style hurdle fencing. As you can see, I've put in 6 stakes in the ground covering 2.5 meters. They're a half meter apart, and I have woven a lot of rods in already. I will show you how that is done now. So you're going to use the butt end of a rod each time you weave, and the butt end is the thick end and the opposite end is the tip. So when you're doing this weave, you will always bring 2 rods one direction, and when that's done you will bring 2 rods back the other direction. So as you can see, I've ended on tips over here, so the butt of this rod is going to start in that corner. We're slightly confined within our canopy today. We're fighting against the rain of an Irish summer. So the last rod, as you can see, started down here to my left and it finished in front of the post, so the butt of this one goes behind the post, on top of it, locking in the previous rod. So we simply put that there, the butt of it, and then we bring the rod around the next post and behind the one after that, in front again, behind this one, and then in front of the last rod. And we're going to simply push the rod down, right down as far as it'll go. At the end of your hurdle, if they're obstructed like that, you can simply snip off the excess. So that's one rod in place. Now he needs a partner. So taking another rod of similar size, we're going to do the exact same thing, only on the opposite side of each of your standards. So the butt end of this rod goes on the opposite side to the post for the previous rod started, and it goes behind the second and in front, so it's constantly opposite the previous rod. And we just weave it right to the end, and again I'm going to snip it because it's so long, and we tap it down into place as easily as that. Now that's weaving one direction. The next element of a wattle fence is to weave in the opposite direction. So again, taking 2 rods of similar size, we start at the opposite end. And we are going to take the butt, and because that one finished with its tip behind the first standard, we are now going to start in front of the first standard. So again, the butt locks in there, and tap it into place, and it goes behind the second rod, in front of the third, behind number 4, in front of number 5, and behind number 6. And we just tap it down into place once again. All very straightforward. And his partner is then going to do the exact opposite of what he did in the same direction. So he's going to start behind the first standard and come in front of the second one, behind, in front, behind, and in front to finish. And again we tap it into place. I'm going to take off this jacket. The rain has washed through and left me sodden. So, thank you. I'm up. So we're going to continue to build up this weave, and I'm going to talk you through it briefly as I go. So taking 2 more rods, we again go to the opposite weave of the previous 2 rods. So the tip end here finished in front of the rod, so we start behind it. So our butt end goes behind the first standard, in front of the second, behind, in front, behind, and in front to finish. And tap down into place. And the next rod goes opposite that. It starts in front of the rod, behind, in front, behind, in front, and behind. And that's just to put it in place, and then we just tap it into place as we go. And very quickly the fence gets very solid. That one has popped out on me. Just pop it back into place. And always keep your secateurs handy for trimming it. So I should explain how I laid out the rods. This is a straightforward hurdle, 2.5 meters long, just because of the width of the gazebo we're in. So every rod is put into the ground 50 centimetre intervals, every half metre. These are the bottom ends of the larger rods that I had cut These are fresh willow cut yesterday. So we'll cut the ends off the rods, we level the tops of them and leave a point on the opposite end with your loppers. So we use this for the heavier rods and a secateurs for the smaller parts of them. Or if you get used to it, you'll get used to using a secateurs to cut them even at an inch or an inch and a half thick. So we use a special tool for planting willow. It's just a rod 20 centimeters long. It's a steel rod stuck in a wooden handle. We use that to make holes for the willow. It's a matter of just driving it straight into the ground. Put 20 centimeters straight in, and you give it a wiggle to open up the hole, and then you can simply drive your rod straight into the ground. That's what I've done here, and I will show you how to do that again when we're doing the live willow fencing demonstration. So we put in 6 of those posts, all at 50 centimeters apart in a straight line, because we wanted a straight hurdle in this instance. If you were doing a curved fence, you would gently curve the posts. It's very difficult to do a corner without the willow cutting across the corner on you. So if you're doing a large area, you simply curve it very gently over 5 or 6 meters if possible. If you are joining willow, which is an important part of learning how to do these fences, if you're making a long fence, you will inevitably start with a butt and come to a point, you will weave to a point where you run out of tip. At that point you need to do a join, and the join is quite simple. You simply put another rod in where the butt or where the tip is going to finish, maybe back 1 or 2 posts. In this case here, we would put a butt in where this one is running out. We want to hide all the butts behind the fence. So you would put the butt in there, lying on top of the one that you've been weaving, and then simply continue to weave. And that is a continuation of that weave. So if you were doing a fence 30 meters long, you just continue putting the butt in first when you come to a tip on the same side. Then you reverse it and give an opposite, partnering the entire length as well. So you work 2 rods all the time the same direction. So you will just give an opposite to those 2 rods as well. So you will always put a butt in where a tip is coming close to finishing. I'm going to take those 2 out just to avoid confusion, and I'm going to continue weaving this up in height. So we finished with a butt in behind a rod here, so we're going to, or with a tip in behind a rod here. So we're going to start with a butt there, and behind the second, in front, behind, in front, and once again we go behind, and I've locked that in. And then we get the opposite partner. He goes behind the rod at the butt end. He goes behind the first standard. In front, behind, in front, behind, and in front. It's a very simple weave and a very straightforward weave, and it's almost impossible to go wrong. I do occasionally go wrong. And we're going to stay going for another few inches, just so everybody is familiar with the weave. So again, the tip finishes in front of the standard at this end. So the butt starts behind it. That locks down the previous rod. So we go behind and we go in front of the second standard, behind, in front, behind and in front. And once again then we put in an opposite pairing rod. So he starts in front of that rod, behind, in front, behind, in front, behind. And always try and use rods, particularly when you're doing 2 one direction and 2 back the other direction. Try to select 4 if you can that are of solid thickness and weight. This counterbalances the pull that are on your uprights, so you don't get an upright that is suddenly leaning out against the others. It counteracts the pull on them each time and ensures that your fence remains straight and more solid. So now we're going to start with a butt end where this tip finishes behind. We're going to put a butt end to the front again, and it goes around the back of that one, in front, behind, in front, and behind to finish. And another one then to counter it starts behind, in front, behind, in front to finish. And very quickly your fence builds up to a good height. And we'll continue to build it for the moment. I'm going to put 2 more in at the far end with butts. So again, tip finishes in front of the rod, so we're going to start behind with the butt. And in front of number 2, behind, in front, behind and in front. And again, to start, we're going in front, behind, in front, behind and in front. This type of willow hurdling was used, had many uses, going back possibly thousands of years. Working with willow and other light woods like this allowed Ireland's early settlers to build fish traps and baskets for carrying food and foraging. Very rudimentary baskets were made, but the craft grew and got more refined to the point where in the 1800s there were various different types of basket all around the country with specific uses. Unfortunately, this has gone into great decline, and there's only a small handful of basket makers dedicated to the craft around the country at the moment, largely operating through the Irish Basket Makers Association. And should you want any more information on basket making and hurdle making and all things willow, do visit the Irish Basket Makers Association website. Starting again, we're going to put a butt in front because the last rod finished with a tip behind. So a butt in front, behind the second post, in front, behind, in front and behind to finish. And that needs a pairing rod that starts behind to lock it in place, in front, behind, behind, in front. And that finishes that to that height. And I think we'll put in 4 more rods, and that'll bring us up to quite a good height. I have a large selection of rods here on the ground. They're from a biomass farm in County Wicklow. There's many different species in this, and they are planted to grow rapidly. So it's very fast growing willow. Most of this is 2-year growth, some of it may be 3-year growth, some of the heavier stuff. But it is a fantastic material to work with. When it gets a couple of years old, it gets branchy, so you have to spend more time cleaning the branches, or cleaning the branches off each rod, than you do actually weaving, or actually harvesting. So, again, it's the butt on the opposite side to the previous rod, all the time. Now we're up a good height there, and that would be nearly high enough to keep in some animals, not all animals. I think a sheep pen would be about 1.2 meters in height ideally. We made a sheep pen just last week for a new movie being made in Ireland, and hopefully you'll see it on the screens, oops, wrong way around, in the next year or so. And when you see a lovely willow sheep pen, you can say, I know who did that. So again, we're starting on the opposite end to where we finished. Butt goes in front this time, behind the second rod, in front of the third, behind number 4, in front of 5, and behind number 6. And then it's going to get a pairing rod, front, behind, in front. Now, that is an extremely tough fence. There is nothing going to get through it. Goats might eventually eat through it, but as it stands, it's a very tough fence. The deeper you have the stakes in, the better. If we're doing fencing for a playground or a park or for a proper purpose where it is going to get hardship, we wouldn't use willow uprights. We would use a 2-inch tannalized post, the height 2-inch wide tannalized post, round, and we can get them anything from 5 foot to 9 foot. So you can build a fence as high as you want to go. We've built these 8 foot high in places, and they'll last about 5 years if untreated, but they can be treated with a mix of linseed oil and turpentine or white spirits, a 50-50 mix, and if it's laddered on once a year, you will get 10 or 15 years out of your willow fence. The beauty of using the tannalized posts is that they will last a lot longer, so when you do go to replace your fence, you can take the brittle willow out quite easily. Just with a big hammer, you'll knock it all out in a matter of minutes, and then you can just simply reweave in situ. Now, I think that's as high as I want to go with that fence. When you want to finish a fence and you want to lock the posts in, the last rod would simply be brought under the previous rods. So that locks it into place. You can do that back further on a longer fence, you could bring it under here first and bring it back over the top and under a second time, and it locks it in place. I cheat sometimes when I'm doing a fence that has to stay in position for long. Excuse me. I'll put in a couple of heavy rods to finish, and I will put a screw at the back of the fence and a heavy end just to make sure it locks it in place and it cannot unravel then. There is also a particular knot that can be twisted right along to finish, but this material is too heavy for that, and I would have to break the fibres to do so. So that's how you do a wattle panel or hurdle. It's, as I said, it's extremely tough and a very, very useful weave to know for a garden or for a park. Now, willow is extremely useful in that it grows prolifically. So if you take a piece of willow and stick it in the ground, it will grow itself straight away. The planting season runs from October through to April, really. In October and April you're at the latter end of it, but I've seen willow grow in August when it's stuck in the ground. It's just taken off, and it'll come back then the following year. Sorry, a frog in my throat now. So I'm going to show you how to make a live willow fence, a lattice work fence. And it's quite simple really. I have a tape laid out here to, I'm going to do 2 meters of a panel. And when you're doing this fence, you simply put down a tape with a screwdriver or something holding it in one end. And you take this willow planting tool, and at 0, you drive it into the ground at that angle. I don't know what that angle is, roughly 70 degrees. And we shove it in 20 centimeters, and we'll give it a little twist like that. We take our willow rod, and because of the height restriction here, I'm going to cut the top off it. Usually I wouldn't bother. Now we'll take our willow rod and we point the end of it to freshen them up. It depends on how long it's been cut. I'm a lefty, so I have to turn around that way. So we just cut a really sharp point onto the top of it. You can see the angle on it. Normally I would have some rooting compound here. I'd give it a dab in the rooting compound to help it grow, but in this instance I didn't bring any because I don't want this to grow. So taking out our tool, we simply pop the rod in and shove it down to 20 centimeters. It'll quite happily sit there. So we come along then to the 25 centimeter mark or thereabouts. So I put them in about every 20 or 25 centimeters, and we put in another hole. Take another rod of similar size. Again, we'll cut the tip of it to allow us some room to maneuver here today. So we have the hole made. That's there, and then I'll come along to the next place and just pop that there. Once again, I want to freshen up the butt of this one. So again, we cut it at a sharp angle, bring it around into its hole, and then we get it down to 20 centimeters. That allows it to root at a good depth and gives it strength in where it's rooting. Now the fence like this can be of any height. We generally make them about 6 foot, although we make them waist high as well. In a lot of parks and playgrounds. We also use this weaving technique to make tunnels and domes, quite a lot of which are featured in parks and playgrounds all over the country, from Derry to Dublin to Cork. We've installed these features in playgrounds. So another 25 centimeters long, and we will put in another rod, and you will cover a lot of ground fairly quickly as you put these in. Again, we're restricted by height. Don't worry about rods that curve a little bit. Generally willow grows very straight, but sometimes they can curve quite a bit. So putting another rod in. Now, it's a job selecting rods. I'm going to start taking them 2 at a time. Normally I would mark out the entire line of rods, make the holes for them, and then come back and prepare the rods. Do them 1 at a time here, just to show you how it works. Down is 20 centimeters, and the next hole. So every 25 centimeters, pop in one of these prepared and cleaned rods using the planting tool. If you haven't got a planting tool, a large screwdriver will work almost as well. It's just the planting tool saves the back. And that's all important. So again, cut it at a sharp angle, and that the reason for the sharp angle is to maximize the potential for a strike, which is growth from the willow rod. The more exposed bottom it has, the more likely it is to throw roots out. And again, I'm just cutting the tops off these to give myself some room. Now, 2 more rods will finish this section out. Every 2 meters or so, I would use one of the 2 meter or the 2-inch pencil posts I discussed, just for support while the fence is growing. Every couple of meters, once the fence is in and in place, you can pop in a pencil post behind it, just cable tie it to it. Now, down to 2 centimeters. So that's all the rods lying this way. We have 2, 4, 6, 8. That covers approximately 2 meters. Now, to make a lattice work, we need to put in holes going in the opposite direction. So I'm going to turn my back on you while I make some holes here. I'll turn my side. So about 10 centimeters from where this rod enters the ground, we're going to put in an opposing rod. Just like that. Every 10 centimeters, there's no need to measure it. You can do this by eye quite easily. A little hole again. And every 10 centimeters. And make sure to widen that out there. There's a reason for widening out the hole, and that is to allow us to put in some peat moss once everything is in place, just to enhance its chances of striking. Now, I hope I can find these holes in the grass once I go to put the rods in. So that's almost done. Number 6. 7. And that one is hitting a rock. But we'll not worry about it too much. So now we need a series of rods that will go in there. So taking 7 rods, and I'm going to once again use my secateurs to clean them. So again, these are very fresh, there's no real need to go very far in cleaning these. But if the rods had been cut for a number of weeks, you could take 3 or 4 inches off the bottom to make sure that the dried end is removed. Hopefully it will allow a better chance for growth. But at the moment I'm just taking an inch or 2 off each of these to freshen the bud. And again, as I said, it's not necessary because these were only cut yesterday. Now, I'm just going to try turn these without knocking the place down. Actually, I'm turning in the wrong direction. I don't need to turn them at all. But I do need to take some of the tops off. Now, goes behind there. So, time to put these in place. So as I said, we would put rooting compound on those now and then pop them in to the holes we've made. Usually quite easy to find the holes if you're working on a rather new playground. The chances are there won't be much grass, but sometimes if you're installing a park, playground or a creche, you can be working in any kind of soil. Often you'll hit rubble and it's a matter of trying to clear it out of the way. If you should hit a rock that you can't move or get around, you needn't worry too much. Usually the other rods will support it. Now, I'm going to go behind the weave to show you what happens next. We're finished with that. So the next element of creating our living willow fence is weaving it. And again, I'm just going to trim some of these a little tall for what we want. We're going to hit that canopy. So I'll just take a bit off them. Okay. So to weave your lattice work fence, it's a very simple weave. We take the first rod on the right. I'm left-handed, but I work from the right. And you can see that this rod is already in front of the very first one it meets here. So we're going to leave it there and we're going to bring it behind this rod. So that just sits as it is. That's the end of the fence. The next rod is this one, and you can see once again it's in front, so it needs to come behind this one here. So you bring it behind and then you bring it back in front of this, and you can see a diamond pattern starting. So we go to the next rod, which is here. Once again he's in front of this rod, so he needs to go behind this rod here. Using your elbow, keep him down out of your way, and he goes behind this one and in front of this one. At this point I'm going to cheat and use cable ties. Historically people would have used jute string like so. I don't know if that might be hard to pick up on the camera. I'll hold it in front of the blue shirt. Just jute string. It's quite strong. You would put a tie on there with jute string, and that would essentially hold the shape there. But I'm going to use cable ties. So what you want to do here is find a place that's a little over waist high, but is directly over the diamond below it and directly over the center of the two rods below. This is to ensure that you keep a good pattern. You snap on a cable tie, put it on loosely at first, get it to the height you want. Before you tighten the cable tie, you just tap your two rods to ensure that they're standing straight. Make sure it's over the center of where you want it. Pull your cable tie tight. Now that is starting to form your pattern. These are still free, but they will soon firm up as the weave progresses. So now we need to weave this one. He's in front of this guy here, so this is the one he needs to go around. So taking all the ones that are leaning to the left, we'll just push them back out of the way until we bring him behind it. And again, we're restricted by the gazebo a little, but we'll manage. So he's now behind the second one. He needs to go in front of the third rod here, and he goes behind number 4, and again he goes in front of number 5 to continue the weave. Now you will see that the rods have a mind of their own. Now don't worry about them, let them do what they need to do. We have to mirror this joint here in this one, so we need to bring it over the center to the same height, give the rods a tap if they need to straighten them, and don't worry about any of the other rods what they're doing. Again, put your cable tie on, set it at the same height, ensure you're over the center, pull your cable tie tight. Now this doesn't look like it's matching, but that'll change shortly. So this is the next rod. Again, he's in front of this one, so we need to bring him behind that one, in front here, behind, and in front and behind. So we bring them down to meet, being ever watchful of where the joints should meet. So again, it needs to be over the center here. This one is lighter, you can see it kinking a bit, but don't worry at all about it. They're both straight there at that. We're going to get it to the same height and over the center again and snap on our cable tie, or jute string again if you prefer. The beauty of jute string is that after a year or two it will automatically break down, or it will biologically break down, it will fall apart. The growth of the willow will push the fibres or pull them apart. With cable ties, they will actually eat into the bark, and you will need to remove them after about 2 years. Hopefully at that point your willow rods will have grafted together. So again, we're going to take the next rod leaning to the right. He's already in front, so he needs to go behind this rod. Using your elbow again, keep them up, keep them down out of your way, so he needs to come behind them, hold them down, in front, behind, in front, and behind. Once again, we're looking for these two to match over the center point. When they're straight and at the height you want, we'll snap on our cable tie. And you can see already that the rest of them are becoming relatively uniform in the lattice work. Now the lattice work can go to any height. We've made them 8 foot high again, and taller. At that point we will put on a second tie in a row along here to hold the shape. But for the demonstration, we're just going to go to a little over waist height. So our last rod leaning to the right is here. Again, he's in front already, so he goes behind. We come out in front. Again, we come behind, in front, and behind. As you can see, they're all starting to match up. And again, we're over the center. We're straightening those rods. Now we're going to snap on a cable tie once we're happy that that's where it goes. Now, for an end, we're going to put an end on our fence here. So we need a big rod, and a straight one at that. And using our loppers, we're going to take a good sized scalp off it, like so. Now, where is my planting tool? I'm going to pop this in the ground. We don't need the tape anymore. So, I'm going to make a hole for this rod. And I have a small lump hammer here specifically for putting in posts like this. And a few taps will bring it right down. Now, so that's a bit heavy for what I want for a corner. So I'm going to just pop it out. I'm going to find a lighter rod. For your corners you need a very flexible rod that will come around the other rods. So this is ideal. I'm going to leave the height on it for a moment, so I'm going to pop that back in there. So the continuation of the pattern would be another rod coming from 25 centimeters here and lying in that way, but because of the end of the fence we don't have that, so we simply take this rod and we bend it around the upright. Now this upright, again, I would use a 2-inch tannalized post normally, so this may pull in a little on me, but because this joint here, the last rod that went around the back of it, this one has to go in front to complete the pattern, and you will see it doing that. Behind, in front, and behind, and again it fulfills the pattern. And we're going to put our cable ties on there, and I'm reaching for cable ties in that pocket where I usually have them when I'm working, but they're not there now. So again, we're over the center point, we're at the same height as the others, and we are tying that off. Now you can see that that maintains the fence. So to continue the fence, we then need to bring this rod here around our post, and he goes in front of this and behind this one, and that's pulling in a little, but that's unavoidable, I'm afraid. So I am going to put on some cable ties here to hold that end as it should be. And that is how you put a corner or an end on the fence. Now normally we would cut it across there, just above that join there, but I'm actually going to go a little higher with this fence to show you how it works. We might even join up the other end. So, again, we're bringing these over to a height where they're right directly above the previous cable tie join, and we're joining it there. So here it's just a matter of popping the cable ties on now because the weave is already in place. The day has brightened as the fence has progressed, thankfully. And the sun might even shine when we're finishing it. So again, just snapping on cable ties, very quick, very effective. Putting on jute is far nicer, far more ecologically friendly, and I would recommend it, but it's also much slower. And when you're planning on removing them in 2 years' time, I forgive the cable ties because they're easy to remove, and once they're properly recycled, we forgive ourselves the sin. So now we have a nice height there. I'm going to put an end on this here as well, just while we have time to do so. So selecting another chunky rod and turning it in without knocking down recording equipment. I will bring this rod over and cut it again. And I'm making that much harder than it needs to be. So we want it to be around the same height as that, so about there. I'm going to cut it at an angle just so that it goes into the ground quite easily. So again, we need to make a hole for this rod. I'm going to remove my screwdriver and tape. Another 20 centimeter hole, and I need my small sledgehammer. My little friend, it's the best little sledgehammer ever. So again, the rod goes straight down into the hole we've made and beat it down just for solidity. Okay, so the end of this is just the same as the last time, except we have one more rod in here first that we made a hole for and didn't use. So that was actually on the outside, and I hope I'm still on camera here at the end. So once again, we bring that around our outer post, and it has to go behind the previous rod in front of this one, and we'll put on a cable tie there again. Once we're over the center, it's at the right height, the rod orientation is the same. We'll snap on a cable tie to complete that. It goes behind this one in front there, and again we put our cable tie on there. It's a quick and easy fence. That's 2 meter section done in a matter of, well, in a very short space of time. So this one comes around then, and we don't want to hear the dreaded crack of willow at this point, because sometimes they break, and when they break it isn't a big deal. We simply pop it out of ground and replace it. Now again, my internal rods are pulling in a little, my end rods I should say. They're a little light for what they are. I would use 2-inch tannalized posts normally. Now that is our weave. Again, when the posts are on, I would put a couple of heavier cable ties just to hold them in place at the ends if you think that's needed. In this case it isn't. I'll be taking it out shortly. The next important thing is to clean off your cable ties. Now when you're cleaning your cable ties, you need a good sharp secateurs. And there's a real trick to cleaning cable ties so that people don't get cut on them. If you cut it badly, it leaves a sharp end. And people, children particularly, if it's in a playground, in a dome, or a tunnel or a wigwam, if they catch themselves on it, they will give themselves a nasty scratch or a cut. So when you're cutting your cable ties, make sure the blade of your secateurs rests flat against the end of the cable tie where you're cutting it. And just snip it, and then just test it with your finger. You should have put the cut directly across the cable tie. And always leave the cable ties to the outside, away from wherever children or adults are playing. If you're wearing an expensive wool jumper and it catches on one of these and pulls a lump out of it, well, don't blame me if you haven't put your cable ties correctly. But that's a very important part for health and safety reasons, is will grow in the spring if we leave it here. Most likely, as I say, it's out of planting season. When we're taking orders for live willow fencing, we generally start taking orders from Halloween, and we will work through until the first week of April or thereabouts. It's very impressive fencing, very pretty. It's great for roses or any other climbing plants. We generally trim them a couple of inches up from the cable tie, making sure that some of the little buds are at the top, so that they will have a chance to grow. You can leave them 3 or 4 inches higher if you so desire, and it leaves a very nice and impressive little fence. Very quickly made and very quick to grow. And that is a lattice work living willow fence. That will all leaf up in the spring, right up along if we're lucky. Now they're good sized fresh willow rods. If you're using smaller rods, you can put 2 of these in the ground together, and again they will form the one root ball and will grow together and they will graft together. So it's possible to do that too. But if you can get good sized willow rods, they have a better chance of growing quicker. And that is how that is done. I don't know how we're doing on time. 12:45. Okay. Well, I'm going to wrap it up at that. That is our demonstration finished. The first is the hurdle. Very simple. Start with butts, weave along, put in one rod and put in an opposite rod at butts the other end too. Then come along and work the opposite direction again. Where a butt finishes, or where a tip finishes, put a butt on the far side and work back. Just continue that pattern the whole way up to make your hurdle. For the living fence, every 25 centimeters, put in a row of willow, and then 10 centimeters offsets, put in an opposing row, and weave them as I've shown you. And yeah, use cable ties sparingly, but they're very, very good for what they are. Or use jute preferably if you have the time to do so. I hope you enjoyed that. I would like to thank you for joining us today. Athlone Castle were very good to host us and to hold the event for Heritage Week, and I'd like to thank them for having Pat, myself from Wicklow Willow here to do it. I would also like to thank the Irish Wall Towns Network and particularly Heritage Council for having us here today and for funding this demonstration. I hope you've enjoyed it, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Don't be afraid to visit wicklowwillow.ie. If you have any queries about fencing, I'm always happy to answer any queries about what you saw here today. Thank you.